Hello and welcome back to the KCC channel. I'm Rob and I hope you're having a wonderful day today. Today, we're jumping into some malicious compliance. Now, before we start, we're only 750 subscribers away from 100,000 subscribers. Whoa. But looking into some of the numbers, it appears that half of you watching exactly aren't actually subscribed to the KCC channel. In the words of our favorite Karen, what are you waiting for? If you don't subscribe, I want to talk to your manager. Let's get back to the video. Our first story today comes to us from Dark909911. That'll cost you. Let's jump right in. I was helping my youngest daughter pack up the truck to move over the weekend. We had a good amount of people, so the work went quick. There was close to an hour before they had to leave. There was my daughter, her maternal grandfather driving, and another car following with more things, plus her two kids. Her grandfather worked with my father in the same mill and once in a while worked together. This was a story he laughed as he told it. This is as close to how Roy told it and how I remember what he said. There was a piece of equipment needing fixed. He said what it was, but I have no clue what he was talking about. Just remember, this cost close to $300,000 back in the mid-80s. It was the original piece from when the mill opened in 1968, so parts were obsolete and Dad had to make them by hand. Roy said the bearing burnt up and stripped some teeth from the main gear. From what he was saying, Dad not only made the gear by hand, he also made a puller to get the gear off, because that bearing needing replaced was behind it. Dad had gone to get the puller when the shop supervisor came over to talk with Roy. He asked how long the job would be and was told at least 5 days. 3 days to make or repair the new gear and another 2 days for teardown and setup. Roy said Dad might be able to fix this one, and if that was the case, 3 days minimum. The shop super asked why Roy was just sitting there and not taking the gear off. He explained where Dad had gone and what he was getting, and he would be back in a minute or two. This was not good enough for the shop supervisor, and he grabbed a sledgehammer and said, "If you just tap it with this, it should come loose enough to just pull it with your hand." Dad had just stepped into the room and hollered for the shop supervisor to stop before he breaks something. I guess he looked right at Dad and smacked the gear. I have no idea what it was made of, but he hit it in just the right spot to break the gear into a couple of pieces. Needless to say, Dad and Roy were upset. They walked into the office of the general manager and told him what just happened, and instead of the 3 days they could have had it done in, it will now take the 5 days or so. He was pissed. First, the shop supervisor is not to touch any tool unless passing it to the person using it, and another is he is not to try any repairs himself under any circumstances. The next day, when Dad and Roy got to the machine, there was a gear sitting there. The shop supervisor came over and said he had it flown in from somewhere in the States and it cost $20,000 because it was air expressed. Dad tried telling him that it is the wrong gear and he will just build one he knows will work. Shop supervisor told him to use the gear he bought because he wasn't going to waste that much company money without using what he bought. Here is the malicious compliance. Dad and Roy got the bearing changed and were done getting the gear into place. It was made from a different material and a few other major differences. When they were all done, they called over the shop supervisor and the general manager to show how the machine is fixed. Roy and Dad gave the shop supervisor the honor of starting it up and showing how well it's working. With a big smile, he started it up. It ran well for about the first 5 minutes of the 15-minute test run, when it started making odd noises. Before the shop supervisor could hit the emergency stop button, there was a loud bang and lots of screeching metal. Dad and Roy took the covering off and saw that not only the gear was destroyed, but it was in tiny little pieces all throughout the machine. The main rod where the bearing got replaced had broken in a couple of places. It would cost the company more money to buy the parts and fix this one than it would be to order one from Japan. Within 6 weeks, the Japanese workers brought the new machine but had set it up and calibrated. This cost the mill just under $3 million, where it would have cost under $50,000 if Dad and Roy were left to fix it. Since the shop supervisor wasn't part of the union, he was fired on the spot. When the mill fired him and wouldn't even let him on the property, he had to wait for security to bring everything from his office. Roy said the shop supervisor wasn't made to pay back any money for his major mess up, but his name was blacklisted in the industry. He moved away within a month, and as far as Roy knew, no one had heard from him since. Dad and Roy didn't get any real bonus for the job, but there was a little extra on their paycheck the next week. Roy said he can't remember how much, but it wasn't a huge amount, but it made a difference. I love hearing stories about my dad at work. He always had a warped sense of humor, so any malicious compliance by him was usually a doozy. But it wasn't just at work. Anywhere was not safe from him. Too bad he isn't here to tell me more stories, but I have memories of some, and I hear more from people he was friends with or worked with. I hope you enjoyed reading them as much as I love hearing them. When a supervisor has no clue what's going on but insists that things are done their way, things are going to go wrong. I've always been of the opinion that a supervisor should know the job that they're supervising in and out. That means actually doing that job for a period of time before you're allowed to be a supervisor. I guess that didn't happen in this case. Our second story today comes to us from blah blah 17. Want me to rush the work? Okay, pay double and wait longer. Let's jump right in. Just some background info, I own a body and paint shop in a city with lower cost of living than the surrounding cities. Because of this, my prices are more reasonable than some other shops in the surrounding areas. Also, I am very picky when it comes to my work and have the mindset that, regardless of what my customers are paying, within reason, I will take extra steps to make sure the end result is up to my standards. I always include warranty on my work. As a result of this, most of my customers are referred to me from the other more expensive cities around because they want quality work at a lower price. My prices are not cheap, but they are lower in comparison to more high-end shops in more expensive areas for the same quality work. This has usually been a win-win for me and my customers. Now for the malicious compliance. I had a guy call me and ask the usual questions. He agreed to bring his vehicle down to my shop so I could inspect it and give him a quote. The following day, he brings his vehicle down to my shop, and I immediately realize that the vehicle has been previously painted. Experienced painters can usually tell. In this case, it was obviously not done correctly, as the paint was already beginning to fail. He wanted to do a full restoration of the vehicle to factory condition. I explained to him that due to the fact that the vehicle had been repainted before, there could be a chance that the time frame or price could change depending on what is underneath the paint once I start sanding. For example, improper bodywork or prep work done by the previous painter. I also tell him that if I do find any issues, that I will run them by him before continuing to make sure it still fits within his budget. We agree to the terms and a rough time frame of 3 to 4 weeks, so long as there are no surprises. He leaves a deposit and I begin work on his truck. 3 days later, I have the bed removed as well as the front end, doors, and interior, leaving the truck as basically a skeleton. I start sanding the parts, and I get through the paint layers and see that there is some previous body filler on the panels, which is normal on older cars, especially when they have been repainted. Most of the time, it's no biggie when the previous repairs are done properly, meaning the body filler should never exceed 1/8 of an inch thick. But I quickly find out that the cab of the truck had had a pretty severe impact before, which the previous body shop had not pulled out before doing bodywork, and the panel had a full 1.5 inches of body filler. I stopped what I was doing and called up the owner to let him know. After discussing it and sending him a video of the issues, we agreed to adding an extra 2 weeks to the time frame and additional repair costs. I began the proper repairs, and about 2 weeks into the original drop-off date, I get a call from the owner of the truck. He tells me that he needs the truck to be done by the following week because he has a buyer for it and he doesn't want to wait any longer. At this point, I have the truck completely torn apart. I have only finished the bodywork on the cab and front end and just started the repairs on the bed and doors. We had agreed to an additional 2 weeks on top of the original time frame, which still had not come yet, for a total of 5 to 6 weeks. I explained to him that it would not be possible for me to get all the remaining work done within a week without me having to hire more people, which would add to the cost of the job. He followed up by saying that he would not pay a penny more, and that if his truck was not done by that date, he would be at my shop with a tow truck and law enforcement to take it, and he wouldn't pay the remaining balance. Now, I knew that he would not be able to get away without paying the balance, and that law enforcement would back that up. In my state, I am allowed to place a lien on any vehicle that has a balance on labor already performed and agreed to by the customer, which he had. Now for the malicious compliance. At this point, the customer had begun making threats and insults, so I tell them I would get the truck done on the conditions, the warranty would be void, I would not be responsible for any previous work done to the truck that may fail, and the outstanding balance would be paid in full on the day of pickup, and that the job would be considered complete. He agreed to the terms and told me to do what I had to make sure it was done. I proceeded to finish the repairs I had started, still doing them the way I should, but for the remaining parts, I simply sanded the paint a bit and proceeded to paint the truck. Sure enough, the paint showed issues immediately, but the truck was finished on time. The owner comes to pick up his truck and is livid at the results. He proceeded to call the police because he did not want to pay. The police arrive and I show them the paperwork he signed as well as all the text messages backing my explanation. The cops then tell him that unless he pays the balance, he would be forced to leave the truck and pay storage fees until it was paid. He reluctantly paid the balance and proceeded to take the truck to another shop, which the truck sat at for an additional 4 months. He had to pay almost double the price I was charging to have them redo some of the work. The parts I took my time on before the whole issue arose were left alone. A lot of people don't understand how much work goes into something that they don't know how to do themselves. This, combined with somebody who's a butthole, makes this situation a lot worse. A quick mention that this story was written as one big run-on sentence, as you'll see on the screen, so kudos to this guy, Go Gooplet, who rewrote the whole story with punctuation and line breaks. Thank you so much. Our next story today comes to us from Executor Axon. If you don't have a good review, don't say anything at all. Say no more. Let's jump right in. This happened years and years ago when my school had taken us on a 2-day field trip to a hill station close to the city. All of us on the trip were kids who were in the 6th to 8th grade. The trip was a blast and everyone had fun. The event happened just before we were supposed to leave. So our school had a weird policy where after every field trip, they would gather all the students in one room and pick out a random group of students and ask them to say a couple sentences about the venue and experience, whatever. 5 of us were chosen for it this time and were asked to wait in an adjacent room and come out one by one. It was all cool till the first girl went up to the mic and said, "The experience was nice, but I felt like the food that was served was stale. I think a few people got sick." As soon as she finished speaking, the vice principal flew into a rage as she descended on this poor girl and started screaming. "Who do you think you are? These guys have been working super hard for us all weekend. If you don't have anything good to say, don't say anything at all." Now, her reaction might not make sense, but the hotel where we were staying at belonged to some relative of hers, which is probably why we were there in the first place, and she felt some type of way about it. That girl almost started crying as she came back to us. I was next up, so I was standing and waiting, but the VP went on a long rant about being well behaved and setting a good example. I think at this point it's worth talking about one of the other kids chosen to do this pointless exercise. He was an older kid in the 8th grade, and he had an accident on the trip, so his arm was slinged up. The accident was, I think, caused partly by negligence from the hotel staff. I'm blanking on the details right now, and he was fully prepared to talk about it. So this tantrum made him especially pissed, especially because the same VP had refused to send him home early from the trip because it would cost too much. He told us this later. This guy holds my arm and tells me, "Hey, she said don't say anything if it's not good, so don't say anything." So I went out, stood there for a few seconds, said, "I don't have anything to say," and came back. The kids who went after me did the same. This guy went last. He goes up to the mic, and at this point, the VP is shouting again, "Did you do this? Don't you dare say nothing." or something of this sort. He says, "I loved being here, glad that I was able to be here even after I hurt my arm. I will be really sad now that I have to go back to my parents and an actual doctor." The vice principal lost her crap at that. Most of the kids were too young to understand sarcasm, but they definitely did start laughing at her. She threatened to suspend and fine everyone there, and she delayed the buses back to our town by 2 hours as punishment. A few days later, they called my parents in for a disciplinary hearing, and the VP started narrating the story to them. When she got to the point about the complaint from that first girl, my dad said, "Wait, so the hotel was serving stale food?" I think the VP kinda got shook by that a bit, because I was asked to go back to class shortly after, and nothing else came of it. So this is an interesting story because they wasted money on a substandard and frankly unsafe trip that injured one of the students, and also delaying the buses coming back. Is that a case of false imprisonment? Because that could be criminal charges. Our last story today comes to us from Crinksy. Your only working area would be the changing room. Let's jump right in. Now, this happened a few years back, but I still remember it clear as day, as it was the first time I caused this much trouble during work. I was a part-time retail assistant for a retail clothing store, a rather popular one at that, but I won't state its brand name here. During the holidays, it was quite common for customers to ask for different sizes for the items on display. The usual protocol would be for me to call someone to take the item, go to the cashier, and use the machine there to check whether the item had that particular size, or if any of the other local stores around this area had them. Note that there was a rule that there had to be someone working in the changing room at all times. As an employee that have worked there for a month, I already knew that most of the time no one really followed this rule, as we were understaffed. So when someone asked for me to check for the size they wanted on the item, I would leave the changing room and take no more than a minute to check it. The customers didn't mind, nor did my other colleagues. The problem only came when the HR team came to do a sudden check the other day to ensure that we were working as per protocols. As luck had it, they saw me leaving the changing room whenever someone asked if an item had a particular size, and told my head manager that I was breaking the protocol literally every 5 minutes. My head manager was not happy. She paged for me and told me, "Your only working area would be the changing room. Do not move from that area." I couldn't even explain myself. Alright then, for the next few weeks or so, customers were not attended to because I could only answer, "Sorry, I can't check for you." This also meant that close to none of the customers were buying anything. Head manager didn't notice because she was always busy in the back room doing admin work and was never on the ground floor. Earnings report came for the month, and my gosh, there were only $2,000 worth of sales completed. This was 5 times less than the revenue we usually generated. The head manager was unable to explain herself and tried to compensate by hiring new employees. This did not work since I couldn't leave my post and none of the other employees dared to leave their post as well, which also meant none of them knew how to use the machine to check for sizes. They were all religiously folding and refolding clothes again to look useful, but no actual sales were being made. Well, it didn't come as a surprise when the head manager was fired and HR decided that having an employee standing in the changing room at all times was a stupid rule as well. Ah yes, the world of retail. Don't follow the rules, you get in trouble. Follow the rules, you also get in trouble. There's no win here. Reminds me of the manager I had at the furniture leasing store. Again, screw you, Rick. Check out all 4 OPs linked in the description down below. I thank you for watching, hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow.